Welcome back to Agents for Change, a podcast about why people with lived experience of exploitation must be in the driving seat of research and advocacy on modern slavery and human trafficking.
Who's missing from this conversation, and what would it be like to have those people front and centre?
How do we include survivors to create this change? What is the process?
Anna Sereni, a researcher at the Anti-Trafficking Monitoring Group, was joined by Nancy, Kimberly and KJ, peer researchers with lived experience of exploitation who were keen to find out about the long-term outcomes for other survivors of slavery and trafficking in the UK. When the COVID pandemic interrupted the team's research plans, they sat down to reflect on what they'd learnt from the process. In this episode, we'll hear about what getting the logistics right means for survivors doing research, and how the team's views on the term survivor changed. But first, let's go right back to early 2020 and the start of the project.
January last year, I got my status, like 1 year status, and I was so eager to work, so eager to do things. It's like freedom. I received an email from Anna explaining the project. I think at that point I did visualize myself as a survivor, like going into the field and speaking to other survivors.
So Anna reached out to me and she contacted me and arranged to meet up, and she travelled to see me. So she came, not to my home, but nearby, and we went for coffee and something to eat, and she told me about the project, and I thought it was fantastic.
She sent the email that I read about every day to try and figure out if this is what I can do. And then again, I just thought, okay, this is interesting. After all, I'm a survivor looking at things. It's like we are given the voice. Well, people speak for us. So maybe being involved in this, I could somehow bring change, and also it could give me a meaning in my life.
Anna called me on the phone and said to me, this would take a lot of travel, and I love travel, but I've been on lockdown because of the process of getting status in the UK, so I've not been able to travel anywhere. I'm like, Lord, this is a good opportunity. I'm in, get me in.
The team agreed that survivors themselves should be at the heart of research, but what did that mean in practice? When they met for training in London, the practicalities of working together turned out to be a huge part of establishing equity and overcoming the barriers survivors face to actually participating in the anti-slavery movement.
Getting everybody to London was an experience in itself. Just because everyone was coming from different parts of the UK, and I think kind of on reflection, it did also feel like another way just to sort of get to know each other. And I remember I got on the tube with one member of the team and her son, and we took the DLR, and he'd never been on the DLR, and he just was he couldn't work out if he was on a roller coaster, and he absolutely loved it.
She went that extra mile and didn't just book us train tickets. She did hotel, she did childcare, she just did everything, and she met us personally to make sure, we weren't wandering around the city on our own, lost. She even came to the nursery placements and made sure our children were settled, made sure everything was okay.
For training in London, we did our first training, learning more about the basics.
The training was really informative for me.
They explained to us the whole history of the NRM.
Some of that had been delivered by Dr. Chris O'Connell, and the rest was sort of shared between Survivor Alliance and Dr. Andrea Nicholson. The following sessions that we were supposed to have, again, were, as I said, we're about to trying to really delve down into these kinds of some of these ethical questions about when we were out in the field, how to deal with certain situations, and how to sort of, be kind to each other as the research team out in the field if things did come up.
We talked about when we get to the field, how do we interview survivors? What do we look at for? How do we approach survivors if there is any problem? So all this was discussed.
We talked about the ethics of that as well, and ethical principles. But again, it felt like we did that quite blindly because there isn't really a lot out there for people who are working in participatory sort of action research with particular groups. There isn't a lot of sort of guidance on how to do that work. So it felt very much like an experiment in that way.
There's some question you don't just ask someone, right? Like, where are you from, or where have you been trafficked from? Who trafficked you? All those questions, a survivor will know that, okay, those are sensitive questions. I don't just want to ask someone straight up those questions. But for an advocate or for someone who run an organization who are not survivors may not know, how that question might trigger the survivor.
We should have taken a lot more time really to understand where the team was at, I think, and what the different needs and requirements were of the team in terms of their training and their knowledge, and not maybe have just assumed, if you see what I mean. But it felt like one thing we didn't really have was time.
When the pandemic hit the UK, the team was forced to stop in their tracks. But they took the opportunity to reflect on what they'd learnt and how some of their thinking had changed.
And then COVID dashed my hope and excitement of traveling around the UK. And we're not able to do all this.
My sort of last vivid memory of a number of us together was when I think I probably had COVID at the time, but it was late February last year, and I took a number of the team back to King's Cross Station so they could get their train. At that point, it became really clear that the COVID pandemic was worsening quite quickly, and we were kind of halfway through the training sessions at that point.
We could have done alternatives such as Zooming with survivors or speaking to them over the phone, but we didn't want to do that. It was decided that would have been quite impersonal given the nature of what we're doing.
So we sort of decided late last summer that we would have to stop the project, and instead the team talked about the possibility of us trying to write up and discuss our experiences and our learning of that process, and that's where we are now.
We started off by reflecting on our experience during the training and possibly during the COVID. And also we spoke a bit about what we think this would do, the changes it might bring, or what we are gaining from the project and why we wanted to do it.
We had so many words that we have to deliberate on in terms of, for example, like survivors or victims. So those kind of things came up that we have to deliberate on. Okay, how do we put this, or how do people take this, or what does it mean to people?
We started to change a little bit once we started thinking about it. What I found for me is survivor is a comparison. So you've got like victim, survivor, and then some people would start using the term thriver or warrior, and it became this competition between these different stages. And it was, to me, it suggested one person was more empowered than another, and I didn't quite like that. It doesn't make me comfortable, because even if you're a victim and still gone through your experience, where do you draw the line between victim and survivor? At what point do you stop being the victim? At what point do you become a survivor? And there can be so many different elements to your experience.
So now that I'm a bit free, right, to be able to think about what do I really like, or what do I really want? And that is really, for me, that's really hard question, because I've lived all through this experience, being people deciding for me, and then being released and said, okay, let me make choice on my own. It's another process for me, and I'm in that journey as well, to be able to say, you know what, I don't think that's what I want. I don't think that's the term I want to use. I don't think that's the kind of support I want. I think I want this. So this, for me, this is another journey, and it will take me a long time to be able to. This is me just being honest. It will take me a long time to get to that position, to that state as well, for me to then tell you what I want or what I like. Because I have to decolonize myself from the things that I've gone through. People pushing opinions on me rather than me choosing. For me, I'm still in the process. I'm still on the survivor terms. But yeah, so maybe you can give me another 1 or 2 years. I will come back to you and tell you what we like to be called.
Thanks for listening to Agents for Change. In the next episode, we'll find out what the risks are to research developed by survivors and what the movement can learn from obstacles the team faced.
There are some pretty big barriers that mean that this kind of work will continue to struggle or even never get off the ground.
This podcast was created by me, Ella Parry-Davies, with audio engineering by Robin Mayol and music by Danielle Zambo. Find out more at www.antislavery.org/ATMG.